They thought she was just a substitute bride, until the Alpha chose her over the throne. The kingdom of Eldrath lay under a sky of eternal twilight, where the sun seemed always hesitant, lingering on the horizon, and the forests whispered secrets in the wind. Towering mountains framed the land like silent guardians, and the royal palace rose at the heart of the kingdom, its dark spires cutting the sky like knives. Eldrath was a kingdom ruled by power, magic, and fear, where loyalty was measured in obedience and betrayal often wore the mask of courtesy. Lady Seraphine had never imagined she would see such a place. Born to a quiet family in a distant province, her life had been filled with books, study, and modest dreams. And yet here she was, riding along the winding stone road to the palace, summoned by a message that arrived without explanation, only signed with the seal of King Cale. She was not the chosen bride. She was a substitute, a shadow meant to fill the space left by another, and she felt every ounce of that weight pressing on her shoulders. The carriage carrying her rumbled along the road, the soft clatter of hooves echoing against the stone walls that bordered the dark woods. She could feel the eyes of the trees watching her, as if they knew her fate before she did. A servant sitting across from her, nervous and silent, kept glancing at her like she might vanish at any moment. "Lady Seraphine," the servant whispered, finally breaking the heavy quiet. "The palace. It is not as the provinces imagine. The king, he is not a man easily approached." Seraphine gave a small nod, hiding the tremor in her hand. "I did not come here to approach him," she said softly. "I came because I must." The carriage slowed at the palace gates, and her heart hammered in her chest. Guards in black armor, their faces hidden beneath steel masks, regarded her without emotion. A servant took her cloak and led her through halls of marble and shadow. Candles flickered in sconces along the walls, casting tall, wavering shapes that seemed almost alive. The palace felt alive and watching. Finally, she was led into a hall that opened onto the throne room. The space was vast, walls adorned with tapestries depicting Eldrath's kings and queens, each portrait more imposing than the last. And there, seated upon the throne carved from black stone and silver, was Cale. His presence filled the room, even though he sat perfectly still. The light of the candles reflected off his dark eyes, sharp and calculating, and his expression was unreadable. He was said to be feared, even hated by some, and yet Seraphine felt an inexplicable pull toward him, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and fascination. "Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice deep, smooth, and commanding, echoing slightly in the high hall, "you have arrived." "Your Majesty," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands clenched the folds of her gown. Cale studied her silently for a moment. His eyes were like storm clouds, dark and endless, hiding something vast and dangerous. "You were not meant to be here," he said finally, almost to himself. "And yet, here you are." Seraphine felt her pulse quicken. "I am here to serve your Majesty," she said the words carefully, choosing each one as if it might determine her fate. "Serve? You misunderstand. You are not here to serve the court, or me. You are to fill a place left empty by another." His gaze pierced her, and she felt stripped bare, as though he could see every thought she tried to hide. The weight of his words fell heavily on her. She had known she was a substitute bride. She had known the whispers of courtly gossip that called her nothing more than a shadow, A temporary solution. But hearing it from the Alpha King himself, the man whose word ruled life and death in this palace, was another matter entirely. "I will do what is asked of me," she said, steadying her voice. "Not because I wish to, but because I must." Kale's eyes narrowed slightly. Must. Interesting word, he murmured, almost to himself. So many think they act out of duty when they act out of fear. Fear can keep a person alive. Fear can keep a person loyal. But it cannot keep a heart free. Seraphine felt the words settle over her like a shroud. There was something in him that was dangerous, not because of strength or magic, but because of truth. He could see into hearts. He could know intentions before they were spoken. The doors to the throne room opened abruptly, and a servant entered, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the seer awaits in the moonlit chamber." Kale nodded once. "Very well." He rose from the throne, his movements fluid and precise, every inch of him commanding respect and fear. He gestured to Seraphine. "Come. If you are to remain in this palace, you will learn that much here. Nothing is as it seems, and nothing is truly safe." She followed him through the corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. Tapestries of kings and queens stared down at her, eyes frozen in painted judgment. The air grew colder as they approached the moonlit chamber, a place where moonlight always seemed to find a way in, even when the sky was hidden. Inside, an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that glimmered like glass awaited them. She was the seer, keeper of prophecies, and her presence carried a weight that made Seraphine instinctively bow. "You are the substitute," the seer said, her voice soft yet carrying through the chamber. "I have watched your arrival." The winds spoke of it, the shadows whispered, and now the flame of fate flickers before us. Kale's jaw tightened. "Speak plainly," he commanded. The seer's eyes turned to Seraphine. "The one you think is a shadow, a replacement, will ignite a fire that could either save or destroy you, Alpha King." Her gaze lingered on Seraphine. "Do not underestimate her." Seraphine felt a shiver run down her spine. She was a shadow. That was what everyone believed. But the seer's words hinted at something else. A spark, perhaps, that even she had not realized existed within her. Kale's eyes were unreadable. For a moment he said nothing, and the silence felt heavy with unspoken understanding. Then he spoke, low and measured. "We will see, Lady Seraphine. We will see what you are truly capable of." The walk back to her chambers was silent. Seraphine felt the weight of the palace pressing on her, the shadows seeming to follow her with quiet, patient curiosity. Her thoughts swirled with questions. Could she survive in this place? Could she earn the trust, or at least the acknowledgement of a man like Kale? And if she did, what would it cost her heart? As she lay in the high chamber assigned to her, she could hear the distant echoes of the palace, the soft murmur of corridors, the faint hum of magic in the walls, and the low, steady breathing of the Alpha King in his quarters. Sleep came slowly, and when it finally did, it was restless. Dreams of fire and shadows, of eyes that saw too much, haunted her. And always at the edge of every vision, Kale's presence lingered, cold, commanding, and strangely compelling. Morning came with no sun, only the soft gray light of twilight spilling across the palace. Servants bustled, but Seraphine moved quietly, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what was to come. She would meet Cale again in the ceremonial hall, where her place as substitute bride would be made official. And she would face not only the court, but the whispers, the judgment, and the shadow of a king who could see everything in her soul. When she entered the hall, the courtiers' eyes fell upon her like stones. Whispers floated through the air, sharp and thin. She is a shadow, a substitute, nothing more. Who could ever love the Alpha? Seraphine lifted her chin, refusing to let fear show. She had faced long journeys, endless hours of study, and now she would face a court that had already decided her fate. Cale's presence filled the hall before he even spoke. His eyes, dark and stormy, rested on her, and for a moment the court seemed to vanish. Seraphine felt the same inexplicable pull she had felt when first seeing him, the mixture of fear, curiosity, and a dangerous fascination. She was a shadow, and yet, somehow, he was looking at her as if she were more than that. The ceremony began, candles flickering, voices intoning the old words of oath and duty. And then the palace seer's words echoed in her mind. "The one you think is a shadow will ignite a fire." Cale's hand hovered over the crown of the Alpha, then paused. He looked at Seraphine, eyes dark with thought, and said softly, almost to himself, Perhaps it is not the throne that chooses, but the heart." The courtiers shifted uneasily, unsure what he meant. Seraphine felt her breath catch. The night ahead, the weeks ahead, the dangers that waited in shadows, they all seemed less certain, less defined, than the pull she felt in that moment, the dangerous, irresistible pull of the Alpha King. And as the twilight deepened outside the tall windows, a fire flickered in her chest, one that even the darkest palace could not quench. The palace of Eldrath never slept. Even under the muted light of twilight, its corridors murmured with life, secrets moving silently behind walls and tapestries. Lady Seraphine had learned quickly that every corner, every servant's glance, every shadow could hold danger or opportunity. She walked through the halls with a careful balance of poise and alertness, the echo of her steps blending with the faint hum of magic that lingered in the palace. Cale, the Alpha King, remained a figure both terrifying and magnetic. Even when he was not present, his influence pressed down on her. Courtiers whispered his name with fear and reverence. The guards moved with precision that suggested devotion, yet also hesitation, as though they knew his wrath could be sudden and absolute. And Seraphine, the substitute bride, now felt the weight of her precarious place, neither guest nor servant, but something the court could neither fully trust nor fully despise. The morning after the ceremonial hall event, Cale summoned her to the palace gardens. It was a rare sanctuary, a place where the walls gave way to nature and the twilight light danced on leaves like liquid silver. The scent of flowers mixed with the earthy aroma of the enchanted soil. Birds with feathers of shimmering black and violet perched silently, watching them as if aware of the tension between the two humans. "You are improving," Cale said without preamble, his voice carrying softly over the rustle of leaves. He did not glance at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the palace walls. "But do you understand the position you have taken?" "I do," Seraphine replied, her hands folded in front of her. "I am a substitute bride. I am here to keep the place of another, to satisfy expectation." "Expectation is a chain. Do you feel it?" Seraphine hesitated. "Yes. And yet I do not know how much is my own fear And how much is the weight of others' judgment? He studied her silently, and for a moment she thought he might dismiss her. Then, slowly, he said, "It is not your fear that makes you fragile. It is pretending it does not exist. In this palace, fear hides in every corner. It will find you. But courage can shape even destiny." The words struck her with an intensity she had not expected. Kael spoke as one who had known true darkness, and yet here he was, offering wisdom that was almost tender. The Alpha King, feared by all, was not simply cruel or cold. He was more complex, a man who carried burdens no one else could see. As the days passed, Seraphine learned that life in the palace was a delicate dance of observation. Every gesture, every word, every glance could be weaponized or revered. She attended council meetings, silently watching Kael's power, noting the subtle ways he commanded loyalty without raising a voice. Yet she also observed his isolation. He ate alone, walked alone, and when he spoke, it was often to remind others of their place, or to test their intentions. One evening, when the sun barely touched the horizon, Seraphine found herself in the library, poring over the palace's ancient texts. She sought knowledge, any knowledge, about the curse that clung to Kael like a shadow. The pages whispered of blood magic, of a power that bound the Alpha King's heart and emotions, a force that demanded control at the cost of connection. "You are searching for answers," a voice said from behind a tall shelf. She jumped slightly, clutching a book. Kael stepped into the aisle, his presence quiet but overwhelming. "Curiosity is dangerous in this place," he said. "Especially curiosity that concerns me." "I am learning," she replied, steadying her voice. "I want to understand, not to meddle, but to survive here." Kael's lips twitched as if amused, but he said nothing. Instead, he reached for a scroll and placed it on the table. "You are stronger than I thought. Perhaps not in the ways the court expects, but in ways that matter." Seraphine's fingers brushed the scroll. She felt the weight of his attention, a heat that was strange, unsettling, and yet not entirely unwelcome. For the first time, she realized that he did not see her as a shadow entirely. He saw potential, a spark that even she did not fully understand. Their interactions became a quiet battle of understanding. Kael would test her, challenging her knowledge of politics, etiquette, and magic. Seraphine, in turn, began to probe the limits of his patience, gently questioning decisions or pointing out risks. They circled each other like predators and prey, though neither was truly either. Instead, they were two forces colliding, hesitant but inevitable, drawn to each other by curiosity and something more elusive: respect. One night, Kael asked her to accompany him to the moonlit woods, the forest at the palace's edge, said to be haunted by the spirits of Eldrath's ancestors. The path was lined with trees that seemed alive, their bark dark as obsidian, and their branches weaving into the sky like fingers grasping for secrets. The moonlight, silvery and sharp, illuminated the trail, and the air was thick with enchantment. Kyle walked silently beside her, his presence immense even in the open forest. "You wonder why I remain so distant," he said, breaking the quiet. "Why I trust no one, not even those closest to me. Do you want to know the truth?" Seraphine nodded, keeping her voice steady. "I do." He stopped, turning to face her, and the moonlight glinted in his dark eyes. Because to love here is to risk destruction, the curse I carry, it feeds on emotions, on attachment. Those I care for, those I trust, they are in danger. I have lost much. I cannot allow it again. Fear mingled with sorrow, but also with empathy. She could see the weight he bore, the loneliness carved into his very being. And yet she did not look away. "And yet you let me walk beside you," she said softly. "Even knowing the risk." Kale's expression softened just slightly. "Because you are different," he admitted, "different from the others. You are not here to conquer or betray. You simply exist. And that unsettles me more than I can explain." They walked further into the woods, and the forest seemed to respond, the shadows bending around them as if aware of the fragile connection forming between two unlikely allies. The days turned into weeks. Seraphine navigated the court, her presence quietly unsettling the nobles who had dismissed her. She discovered pockets of kindness and loyalty, but also hidden dangers, whispers of rebellion, subtle threats from those who sought to manipulate the king. She learned to read not only the faces of those around her, but also the silent currents of power, sensing loyalty and deception before it was spoken. Kale observed her quietly, noting her resilience, intelligence, and courage. There was a growing tension between them, not born of desire alone, but of understanding and unspoken connection. He began to confide in her, sharing glimpses of the man behind the crown, memories of a lost love, regrets over choices that led to death and sorrow, and fears that even the throne could not ease. One evening, Seraphine found herself in Kale's private chamber, summoned unexpectedly. The room was dim, lit only by a few candles and the silver light of the moon streaming through tall windows. Kale stood by the balcony, his profile sharp against the twilight sky. "You saved me today," he said quietly, his eyes on hers. "In the library. You acted without hesitation, even when the risk was clear." Seraphine felt her chest tighten. I could not let harm come to you," she admitted. "Not because of the king, but because I could not watch someone suffer without trying to prevent it." Kael turned to her fully then, his gaze intense and unyielding. "You are brave, perhaps braver than you know. That frightens me." "Why?" she asked softly. "Because bravery is rare, because strength in the wrong hands can be dangerous, because—" "You are not just a shadow, Seraphine. You are a flame, and I do not know if I am ready to burn." The words hung in the air, charged with meaning neither dared to voice fully. There was a pause heavy with unspoken truths and fragile hope. The connection between them was undeniable, a pull that neither crown, curse, nor court intrigue could erase. But the palace was not blind to their growing bond. Rumors began to stir, subtle but sharp. Courtiers whispered of unusual alliances, of the Alpha King seen walking in the gardens with the substitute bride. Threats, hidden behind smiles and polite bows, began to form, and danger crept closer with every passing day. And then the seer appeared one evening, her voice a whisper that cut through the quiet of Seraphine's chambers. "The fire between you and the Alpha is not yet ready to consume or heal. Shadows stir, choices will be demanded, and hearts will be tested. Prepare, child, for the path ahead will not yield easily." Seraphine swallowed, the weight of her position settling upon her again. She was learning to navigate the palace, to survive its dangers and intrigue, but now she realized survival alone would not be enough. She would have to confront her own heart, and the heart of a man burdened by power, fear, and ancient magic. As twilight fell once more over Eldrath, she stood at her balcony, gazing at the distant forests and mountains. Somewhere in the palace, Kale watched over his kingdom, as always, but now she knew he also watched over her. The pull between them was no longer subtle. It was undeniable, dangerous, and beautiful. And in the shadows of the palace, forces beyond their understanding began to stir. Factions that coveted the throne, spirits of the forest, and the unseen threads of the curse that bound Kale. All waited, and soon Seraphine would have to choose: remain a shadow in the palace, or step into the fire that destiny had begun to ignite. The borders of Eldrath were not peaceful. Beyond the palace walls, where the forests thickened and the mountains rose like guardians of stone, whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. Factions within the kingdom, jealous of the Alpha King's power or resentful of his control, began to stir in secret. And now, with Lady Seraphine walking by Kale's side, the murmurs grew louder. They said the substitute bride was more than she seemed, that the Alpha's focus on her threatened the throne itself. Kael felt the tension as sharply as a blade's edge. The threats were not only from those who plotted against him, but from the ancient forces that still lingered in Eldrath. The spirits of the moonlit woods, the remnants of magic that tied his heart to duty, and the curse that had haunted his bloodline for generations. Every step he took had to be careful. Every choice had to balance power and emotion, fear and desire. Seraphine, too, sensed the changes. The palace, once a place of silent observation, now felt like a web that could ensnare anyone unaware of the threads. She had learned to read expressions, to understand the unspoken, to navigate both shadow and light. And yet, she was learning as well that Kale's world was more dangerous than even the whispers suggested. One morning, Kale summoned her to the Hall of Ancestors, a chamber deep within the palace that few ever entered. The hall was circular, its walls lined with statues of past alphas, faces frozen in stone, but with eyes that seemed almost alive. The air was thick with the weight of generations, a cold reminder of the duty that bound the present to the past. "You must understand," Kale said as they entered, "that the throne is not merely power. It is a chain, and it binds more than just me. It binds everyone who lives within this kingdom, willingly or not. I am beginning to understand, and I see now why the court fears me, or fears what I might bring." Kale's gaze softened. "Not everyone fears you. Some respect you in ways they do not understand. But respect can shift to resentment quickly. You will need to be careful." As they moved deeper into the hall, a chill ran along Seraphine's spine. The statues seemed to watch them, each a silent judge of the present moment. She thought of the prophecy the seer had spoken, the flame that could save or destroy. Perhaps this hall, this place of shadows and memory, was meant to test that very flame. Kale stopped before the largest statue, carved in black stone, representing an alpha from centuries past. "This is the one," he said, voice low, "whose curse still lingers. My ancestors believed power above all. Love was weakness. I have tried to resist their shadow, yet it is part of me." Seraphine reached out, hesitant, brushing her fingers over the cold stone. "And now, will you continue to resist, or will you choose differently?" Kale's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw a storm of emotion, fear, longing, and a weight she could not fully name. "I do not know if I am capable of choosing differently," he admitted. "The curse is strong, and the court, the kingdom, they demand obedience." Yet he hesitated, and for a moment the Alpha King looked vulnerable, human, as if the centuries of expectation had been lifted for just a heartbeat. The moment was broken by a sudden commotion outside the hall. Guards rushed past, their armor clinking, and a messenger entered, pale and trembling. "Your Majesty," he said, "there is a gathering at the borderlands, rebels armed and moving. They demand your surrender or your life." He did not panic. He never did. But the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. "We leave at once," he said, voice sharp, decisive. "Seraphine, you will ride with me. There is no place for hesitation now." Seraphine rode beside Kale, the forest blurring past, the mountains looming closer. She felt the pulse of danger in the air, a rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. This was not a test of patience or knowledge. It was a test of courage, of loyalty, and of the fire that had begun to grow between them. When they arrived, the rebels were waiting, their banners dark and twisted, their faces set with determination and anger. Kale dismounted, his presence commanding, every movement precise. Seraphine followed, aware of the eyes on her, the weight of being both observer and participant pressing down on her. "You dare challenge the Alpha King?" Kale's voice rang out, deep and cold, carrying over the assembled crowd. "Do you not know the fate that awaits those who rise against the throne?" The rebel leader stepped forward, a young man with fire in his eyes. "We rise because the throne is corrupt." "Because the king's power serves himself and not the people." Kale's gaze shifted to Seraphine, and in that glance she felt both fear and trust. "You see," he said softly, almost to her alone, "power alone is nothing. It is the choices that define a ruler." The battle was not one of swords at first. It was a test of will, of strategy, of negotiation. Kale moved among the rebels, commanding, questioning, understanding. Seraphine stayed close, offering insight, reading the emotions in the crowd, guiding him with knowledge she had gained in weeks of observation and study. Hours passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Finally, the leader of the rebels threw down his weapon. "We see now that you do not rule alone," he admitted. Perhaps there is more to strength than power." Kale's eyes, however, remained on Seraphine. "Strength," he said quietly, "is knowing when to stand and when to bend, when to protect and when to forgive." That night, after the rebels had dispersed, Seraphine and Kale returned to the palace. The ride was quiet, each lost in thought. For Seraphine, it was a revelation. Courage, wisdom, and compassion were as important as any sword. For Kale, it was a quiet acknowledgement that his heart, long chained by fear and magic, could trust someone beyond the walls of duty. Days later, Kale summoned her again, this time to a secluded tower room overlooking the moonlit woods. "You have proven yourself," he said, his dark eyes meeting hers, not as a shadow, not as a replacement, but as someone I can rely on. That unsettles me. But I will not pretend to be what I am not. I am here, and I will face what comes, with you. Kale's expression softened, and for the first time she saw him hesitate, unguarded. With me, he echoed, it is not a light burden you take. My world, my enemies, my curse. He trailed off, and the weight in his gaze spoke more than words could. I do not fear shadows, she said simply, and I believe in fire, even if it burns. The words seemed to reach him in a way that no courtly speech or act of bravery had. Kale stepped closer, the faintest smile ghosting his lips. Perhaps the prophecy is not about destruction. Perhaps it is about choice, about what we do when faced with danger, desire, and duty all at once. And in the quiet of the tower, the twilight deepening outside, a bond strengthened, not just of duty, but of trust, understanding, and something neither dared to name aloud. But the castle walls did not hold all dangers. That night, as Seraphine lay in her chambers, she felt a presence at the edge of consciousness. Whispers of magic, faint but deliberate, drifted through the air. The curse that bound Kale was stirring, ancient and restless. Shadows seemed to twist outside her window, and the moonlight carried a cold warning. The choices they had made, the trust they had built, would soon be tested in ways neither could predict. The seer appeared in a dream that night, her eyes glimmering like frozen stars. The fire has grown, but flames can burn or warm, she said. The Alpha King will face the past. The present will demand loyalty. And the future will require both courage and love. Be ready, child, for the path ahead will not yield lightly. Seraphine woke before dawn, the words lingering. She rose, moving to the balcony, gazing out at the moonlit woods. Somewhere beyond, Kale would be awake too, feeling the stirrings of the same unease. The kingdom was alive with threat and magic, with whispers of rebellion and the silent pull of ancient power. And yet, in that quiet moment, she felt the spark of something undeniable. The flame she carried, the one the seer had spoken of, was growing. It was dangerous, it was fragile, and it was hers to nurture. Tomorrow, the Alpha King would face challenges that could test not only his crown, but his heart. And Seraphine, no longer merely a shadow, would stand beside him. The fire had been lit, and soon it would burn bright enough to change everything. The dawn over Eldrath was pale and cold, like a silver blade cutting through the lingering shadows of night. The palace stood tall, its spires dark against the soft light. Yet even in this muted brilliance, the air hummed with tension. Lady Seraphine stood at the balcony, her fingers brushing the stone railing. She had never felt the weight of destiny so heavily. The warning from the wraith of Kale's ancestors had come to them at first light. The throne cannot hold what the heart desires. Choose, or lose all. Kale approached silently, his dark cloak rustling softly against the floor. He did not need to speak. Seraphine could see it in his eyes, the storm of thoughts, fears, and long-held burdens that pressed against him. He had always been the Alpha, the king of Eldrath, a figure of power that demanded obedience. And now the throne itself seemed to challenge him, whispering threats as old as bloodlines and curses. "You feel it too," she said softly, her voice barely above the wind. Cale nodded. The spirits, my ancestors, they test not only the crown, but the heart. And now we cannot hide from what is coming. The palace had been stirred into motion. Guards took positions in the halls, courtiers whispered behind closed doors, and the magical wards that protected Eldrath thrummed with restless energy. Cale moved with precision, issuing commands and adjusting defenses. Yet every decision carried weight far beyond strategy. Every choice could endanger the kingdom or destroy the fragile bond forming between him and Seraphine. The first challenge came at midday. From the horizon rose a figure cloaked in shadow, carried by winds that smelled of ancient forests and forgotten sorrow. The wraith of Cale's ancestors, summoned through centuries of blood magic, hovered at the gates. Its voice echoed through the courtyard, a chilling sound that seemed both everywhere and nowhere. "Alpha King," it hissed, "you have defied duty. You have chosen attachment. The throne demands sacrifice. Surrender her, and your lineage will endure. Keep her, and all will crumble." Cale stepped forward, unyielding. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, locked onto Seraphine's. "I will not give her up," he said, voice low but resolute. "Not for the throne, not for duty, not for fear. My heart is mine to choose." Seraphine's chest tightened. The words she had hoped to hear finally came, yet now they carried the weight of potential disaster. She stepped closer to him. "Then we face it together," she said. The wraith's form shivered, swirling with mist and rage. It raised its arms, and the air itself seemed to twist with power. The ground trembled, and the palace gates rattled under an invisible force. Cale's guards stood firm, but the magic of the wraith was beyond human strength. Only Cale and Seraphine could confront it directly. Cale reached for Seraphine's hand, a rare gesture that carried both protection and trust. "I cannot do this alone," he admitted. "You are not alone," she replied, gripping his hand tightly. "I will stand with you, no matter what comes." Together, they stepped forward, into the courtyard, where the shadow of the wraith loomed large. Seraphine drew upon the knowledge she had gained from the palace texts, the lessons Cale had taught her, and the courage that had been kindled over weeks of trials. She spoke words of light and grounding, the language of magic that resonated with the heart of Eldrath itself. Cale joined her, combining his will and strength with hers. Their magic intertwined, forming a shield of silver light around them, pushing against the darkness of the wraith. The ancestors' spirits hissed and shrieked, the force of centuries fighting against the present. "You think love is weakness," Cale said aloud, his voice ringing with authority and defiance, "but love is the strongest magic of all." Seraphine's eyes shone with resolve, "And we choose it. Together." The wraith recoiled, its form trembling as the combined power of their hearts and magic surged outward. The shadows screamed and twisted, but gradually the darkness began to crack, unraveling under the force of something it could not control: choice, courage, and unwavering trust. Finally, with a final, shattering cry, the wraith dissolved into mist, leaving silence in its place. The courtyard, the palace, and even the air itself seemed lighter. Cale sank to one knee, breathing heavily, the weight of centuries of expectation still pressing on him, yet now tempered by something new: freedom. Seraphine knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. "It is over," she whispered. Cale shook his head slightly, a shadow of a smile on his lips. "Not over, but changed. I am no longer a prisoner of the throne, nor of the curse, and yet it cost us both. You risked everything for you." "I would risk everything for you," she said simply, "because some fires are worth burning for." Cale's eyes softened, dark storm clouds giving way to a rare warmth. He pulled her close, and for a moment, the world fell away. The palace, the court, the shadows of the past. All that remained was the bond they had forged: trust, courage, and the spark of love that neither throne nor curse could extinguish. The aftermath brought challenges, though none as immediate as the wraith. The court was uneasy, some nobles murmuring dissent, questioning the king's choices. Yet Kaal's strength had shifted. He was no longer the distant, untouchable alpha who ruled by fear. He now ruled with understanding, guided not only by strategy and duty, but by the heart he had chosen to follow. Seraphine's presence was no longer that of a shadow or substitute. She moved with quiet confidence, her voice respected, her courage acknowledged. She had become a partner, not merely in love, but in leadership, guiding and advising the king, standing beside him in both counsel and conflict. The palace itself seemed to breathe anew. Magic that had lingered restlessly in the walls now hummed softly, protective rather than threatening. Eldrath, once a kingdom of fear and shadow, now carried a light born of choice and courage. One evening, Cale and Seraphine stood atop the highest tower, gazing out over the kingdom. The sun, hesitant at first, now rose fully, spilling gold and silver across the forests and mountains. Birds sang in the distance, a melody that had not been heard for generations, as if the land itself rejoiced in the dawn of a new era. "You chose me over everything?" Seraphine said softly, resting her head against his shoulder. Cale wrapped an arm around her, a rare gesture of tenderness. "I had no choice," he said, voice low and steady. "I could no longer let duty dictate my heart. I could not let the past chain the future. You, you were the only choice that mattered." Seraphine smiled, a quiet, relieved smile. "And the prophecy? The fire that could save or destroy?" Kaal's lips curved. "It burned, and it saved. Not because of fate alone, but because we dared to stand together. Shadows may linger, but the light we create is stronger." The days that followed were filled with rebuilding. The factions that had threatened rebellion were met with both firmness and fairness. The people of Eldrath began to see the shift in their king and his new queen, understanding that strength and compassion could coexist. In the quiet moments, Seraphine and Cale found time for each other, exploring the palace gardens, walking along the moonlit woods, and speaking of dreams, hopes, and the life they could now forge together. Their connection deepened, no longer hesitant or uncertain, but rooted in trust, courage, and shared trials. Cale's curse, once a shadow over his heart, had been broken, not by magic alone, but by the courage to choose, by the willingness to face fear and embrace love. And Seraphine, once a shadow herself, had become the flame the seer had spoken of, a fire that illuminated the path forward. One evening, as twilight returned to Eldrath, Seraphine and Kale stood together, looking out over the kingdom that had tested them, shaped them, and now celebrated them. The palace, the forests, the mountains. They were no longer silent witnesses, but partners in the story that was still unfolding. Kale's hand found hers, strong and steady. We have faced the past, survived the present, and now we shape the future. Seraphine squeezed his hand, her heart full. And we will face it together, always. As the twilight deepened into night, a single star appeared above the palace, shimmering with light. It was a symbol perhaps of what they had endured and what they had gained. A kingdom saved not by fear nor by power alone, but by courage, choice, and love. The Alpha King and the woman who was never meant to be more than a shadow now stood together, unafraid, unbroken, and bound not by prophecy or throne, but by the bond they had chosen for themselves. The fire had been lit, the shadows dispelled, and a new dawn awaited Eldrath, one where love and power coexisted, stronger together than they ever could apart.